Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and I've just returned from 3 glorious days at White Pass. And from what I found lately, I have the most fun at ski areas compared to the mega resorts, and White Pass is one that always delivers. I stayed directly across the street from the mountain for $200 a night at the only hotel in town, and it's awesome. You walk to the lift from your room, ski until 4, and when you get back, the hot tub pool is open for a few hours. And there's nothing like looking up at the mountain while in the hot tub pool with my son. On top of that, a few 10 barrels only enhance the experience. And when you're done with the hot tub, you cook your dinner in the condo as there is nothing else to do, and that's what's so great about White Pass. It's all about the skiing or snowboarding. One thing I should mention was how cold it was. Day 1, it was like 5 degrees up top and more like -10 with the wind chill. And if there's one thing to know about me, while I do have a high tolerance for pain, I'm so weak when it comes to the cold. I wear boots with heated liners, and this week, a friend of mine, Pete Iverson, who works for Thermic, sent me heated socks and gloves. Holy shit, it was so game-changing. My feet were so warm the entire time, and one of my hands felt that same warmth. The other hand was in a cast that only one particular glove of mine would fit over, so I used hand warmers and that hand froze. But if you get cold in the mountains, Thermic is a difference maker. So thanks to Pete for the heat, and thanks to Kathleen for the hospitality and hookup on tickets. And while I'm talking about small ski areas, Tony at Mission Ridge brought me out for their 7th annual Rails and Ales Jam in downtown Wenatchee. Rail jams used to be a big thing, but they seem to have disappeared. But what Mission Ridge is doing in Wenatchee is truly special. They gave away a total of $7 grand to the athletes on both ski and snowboard with equal prize purses for men and women, and they had about 5,000 people watching. I was on the mic and I had a guy named Petey calling some of the tricks here and there, and man, trick calling is a lot harder at a rail jam compared to a lot of things. My style was to call tricks with confidence, and when I miss one, well, whatever, that was what Petey was for. So that's what I've been up to. And while I've been minimally suffering through life with torn ligaments and a broken thumb, I'm heading back to the doctor in a couple weeks, and if the thumb is more stable, no surgery is needed. But if not, it's a cut and a pin and a long and annoying rehab. I could go on and on about me, but really I should talk about my guest. He's a dude who has some incredible relationships with athletes and brands. Michael Spencer is the super agent to the ski and snowboard stars of today. He makes the deals that allows these athletes to do so much, but Michael does way more than just deal making. He's part negotiator, part business development guy, part therapist, part babysitter for lack of a better term, part cheerleader, and part friend, and we talk about all those roles and the athletes he manages. Before we get into it, I want to ask you to follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement and on Twitter at PowellMovement1. Please share my posts and retweet my stuff as it really does help the show grow and it's greatly appreciated. Finally, I want to thank the incredible brands who make this show happen. They are Stanley, Alpine Vans, Elon Skis, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Now, let's talk with Michael Spencer. So when we were setting this thing up, the one thing that you were worried about was that if we had this podcast scheduled and Shaun White medaled, life would be absolutely crazy for you. He didn't medal, but what would have things been like if Shaun won the gold medal and we're 4 days out of him winning a gold medal? What would your life be like right now?
You know, it's funny. Now that it's all happened, I don't know if it would be that much different. I mean, it's pretty crazy right now. And you know, the only thing that changed is I did not have to go to New York today. I was supposed to, but we got it covered. His publicist is able to handle all this stuff. I mean, for a guy in the Olympics who did not medal, he is booked on every talk show, every daytime show, everything. So it is still really crazy. And it just kind of speaks volumes to, you know, the legend that he is. I just wasn't sure what to expect if he didn't medal, but it's almost like not medaling became one of the most poignant moments of these Olympics and possibly one of the most extraordinary moments of any Olympic Games, just kind of the way he went out as such a legend. It was pretty special.
Yeah, I mean, his body of work speaks for itself. And yeah, it was really awesome and sad to see him go because he's done so much throughout the Olympics. And when I think about him, he's got to be one of the biggest athletes in your stable of athletes. And when did he sign with you?
Yeah, he is. It's funny. So the story is he reached out to Gus Kenworthy, asking Gus who was working for him now, not realizing that, Gus had stayed with me since he was 15, I guess. So, Gus gave him my info. And that was December, I think it was December of 2020. And it kind of ran in the same time. He saw Gus post that he had became the face of Prada and was like, hey, dude, I want to talk to your guy. So once we started talking, I think things really formalized around last February. End of February, early March is when Shaun and I really started working together of 2021.
And since he started working with you, it seems like so many things have changed for him. I mean, he was a Red Bull guy forever, and energy drinks are the cash cow for any athlete, it seems like. And I look at him now and it looks like he's on Celsius, and you're the man behind the deals. Does Red Bull drop him or give him a lowball offer? Or pretty much what I'm asking is, how did he end up leaving Red Bull and going to Celsius?
Yeah, that's a good question. That all happened prior to me. So I don't know the whole backstory. I mean, I definitely, in hindsight, I think for him, leaving Red Bull was definitely a miss. I think, he sees the benefits that he had there. But, once we started working together, I kind of created a little team around him, kind of similar to what I've done with Gus as well, to where we could find the right opportunities. And the Celsius thing came up. We started having those conversations. I think they were in probably midsummer, around July to August. And we're able to finally get the deal put together by late fall. Kind of where that brand wanted to go and who Shaun is and what they were willing to do for Shaun and vice versa. It really is a good fit. I mean, Shaun definitely right now, I mean, if, just watching the games, you can see how genuine he is and about how much he loves the sport of snowboarding and how much it's given to him and how much he wants to give back. So he's kind of on this program now where it's like, this is Shaun 2.0. This is Shaun being what he was in 2006 and 2010 by reinventing partnerships that are going to probably be really long lasting. Even though he won't be competing, he's going to be able to take this into his status as a legend and the legacy that he'll be in snowboarding for the rest of his life.
So that is one huge change. And then another one for him is he spent his whole life since he was probably like 6 or 7 years old on Burton. And unfortunately, Jake's no longer with us. I'm sure he was a huge champion of Shaun and the Shaun White brand. Did Jake not being around any longer, did that have anything to do with Shaun not being on the program?
I don't think it was necessarily Jake not being around. I think there's a point where sometimes things just run their course. And Shaun had probably the longest term contract in the history of any snow sports, really. I mean, I think at one time that deal was a 10-year deal. So he was locked in with Burke forever.
Whoa.
And so after 2018, he kind of went quiet and didn't really snowboard much and everything else. And so I think the parting of ways with Burton was just really that, it was kind of like it ran its course. But even after 2018, he was at the US Open to honor Jake and everything else. So he was still very much part of the family. It just, when he reached out to me and we started talking about, I'm coming back for these Olympics. Here's what I want to do. And he had this board that he had made for him to compete on and train on, a specific half pipe board. And he had already put the white stripe down the base and was like, this is what I want a brand to look like. I want to partner up with a company that will do this or something. And as he was talking about it, I was like, Shaun, it sounds like you really want your own snowboard company. And he's like, well, dude, that would be amazing. I mean, look at what Jake did. Like, I would love to do that. And I'm like, well, if anyone could, it's you. There's no question, right?
Yep.
So that's how that came about. And we started working really fast. I mean, it's been a really unique situation to bring Jossi, his brother, back in the fold and be hands-on with Shaun again, which he was in so many deals, early stages of Shaun's career with Oakley and Burton and Target. And so now to have Jossi in the fold of being basically Shaun's chief creative officer and helping him design both the boards, apparel, and everything else that we're going into, even the goggles that we're working on that you saw Shaun on at the Olympics. I mean, it's been really fun to start to see the results and launch the brand prior to the Olympics and with the success that we had. And the response in particular was just amazing. I mean, it was really kind of mind blowing how well the community and especially his fans were just blown away by this.
I mean, you say the community, but his fans especially. He sold boards that were $1,500 in like 15 minutes, and he sold out of them completely in like 300 boards. They went really fast, and I'm sure they're not light years more expensive than your average $800 snowboard, but they've got Shaun White's name on them. They're limited edition, and they just blew out really, really quick. So it's really crazy to see that. And is the whole thing backed by Backcountry? Is it like a Shaun White product that Backcountry is on the back end of and they're like an exclusive with?
So really the deal is, it looks more like a joint venture. So the ownership of Whitespace is Shaun and a couple of others. And so Whitespace is its own entity, but we've partnered with Backcountry. So, I mean, Jesse's in Backcountry offices almost every other week with his own team building products. So they're helping us on the manufacturing side. We have access to their materials and everything else. So it operates more of a joint venture. It's not really a Backcountry brand necessarily, like you see it with some of the other things, but they were just right there and willing to help Shaun spur this into something and obviously take advantage of the fact that Shaun's going to drive traffic to their site. So currently, all the soft goods will be exclusively on Backcountry, which again was a great way to start this relationship because now we didn't have to go out and figure out how to get sales reps, distribute, or anything else. We have one of the major distributors in the world in outdoor products willing to push this brand. Hard goods will be sold both at Backcountry and at retail, other, brick and mortar shops around the world. So there is a little bit of a difference because our manufacturing for boards, that's not done with Backcountry.
Okay.
For clarification. So there is a little bit of cleaning up in the communication space that we need to do because people have been asking that question in particular. But it'll be nice because people will be able to go into stores and fill and pick up at least a snowboard and understand the integrity of the brand before they even purchase, which will totally bleed into all of our soft goods. But Backcountry is also opening up a bunch of retail stores. So there will be opportunities even on the soft goods, the outerwear and everything else for people to see that in person before they purchase if they want.
Nice. Well, I think it's going to do really, really well, and it's already doing really, really well. And one more question about Shaun with the intro part is he's like one of your biggest athletes, if not your biggest athlete out there. And over the years, he's kind of been in and out of snowboarding. So it's kind of strange where right now he's being celebrated for all his accomplishments. And if you look at him the past 2 weeks, it's a big celebration of Shaun White for everything that he's did. And it's all deservedly so. But if you look at him over the past 3 or 4 years and you look at the core of snowboarding, it's not like they don't like Shaun White or they don't appreciate him because I think everybody appreciates what he does. But he's almost looked like he's not part of the fabric of snowboard culture anymore. Like he's kind of gone outside of that. And is that weird to have like your number one snowboarder almost have not as much street cred as maybe like a lower end snowboarder on a program?
It's interesting. It's definitely a topic of conversation that comes up. I mean, even before the days I represented Shaun, I always thought it was kind of funny that people said that because if you look, and sometimes people would way back in the day say a few things about Simon, although he was a little bit more intertwined into the industry. But you had these two guys plus then Torin with Target, right? Like there's not a single person that went to Winter X Games that didn't benefit from these guys being signed by Target and Target having a presence there, right? So I think it's always kind of funny because the level of success that Shaun's had in the sport has for sure played a part in everyone else's success. The number of eyeballs, the cool factor of the sport and everything else. I mean, Shaun is one of those athletes that when you talk to just people on the street, even in a ski town, and you ask them what snowboarders do they know, and these are the people that go for a week a year kind of thing. The only name they'll pull out of the hat is Shaun White. So he definitely has that. But I understand the question and that there is this culture of being core and everything else, which I think is definitely something that is very beneficial. And there's something precious about that, about these sports. But I think maybe to a certain degree too, when Shaun came back, he saw that and was like, okay, I'm going to ingrain myself into my teammates, into the sport again. And I think he's kind of doing that right now to where he's giving back more than ever now and probably lending a bigger hand to snowboarding than he ever has.
Yeah, and you can see it with the reception that he's getting right now from the core and the masses all together at once, just celebrating what he's done. So it's a pretty cool thing to see. But we're not going to spend the whole time talking about Shaun White. We're going to talk a lot about you. And I believe you're a Utah guy. Are you born and raised a Utah guy?
I am born and raised Utah, in particular, Park City from the age of 9.
Okay. Does that make you Mormon and have you soaked?
I am Mormon, or I was Mormon. I was born Mormon. I am not Mormon now. I should preface that. I misspoke for sure. Yeah, so I was born into the church. My family, especially all on my mom's side, were very religious and still are. It was interesting though, growing up in Park City, I wasn't immersed in the religion. Like Park City was this bubble, and none of my friends were Mormon. Whereas like if you were in Salt Lake, if you weren't Mormon, you were the outcast. And it was almost opposite here, except my friends could care less. Their families were from all parts of the country that had moved to Park City. So they just viewed it as a different religion. And I went there and they went to Catholic church and all those kind of things. So it was just, I don't know. I never felt that change. When I was 16, what was interesting is my parents decided they were done with it for whatever reason, and they stopped going. I continued to go for 2 more years just because it was finally gave me an opportunity to kind of be like, all right, what is this thing that I've grown up with and around? And now I don't have to go. So there were certain mornings on Sundays that I'd be like, well, I got nothing to do. I'll go and start asking the questions that I've always wanted to ask. And by the time I was 18, I'm like, yep, this is not for me.
Huh.
Actually, as I've gotten older, I realized I don't really want to bash on the religion too much, but it's funny. The older I've gotten and the more I've seen and even understanding myself way better, that religion definitely uses guilt as a way to get people to stay true to them, so to speak. And, now as I digress a little bit, but like even working with Gus and then coming out and being part of even this local nonprofit called In Circle and hearing these stories about these kids who grew up Mormon and came out and how the church treated them. It was like, that was the same thing. The church is just guilting them, saying that it's wrong for you to be gay. And that's why we have the highest suicide rate. So like in my mind, I'm like, wow, this church is almost worse than I could ever imagine. It's very frustrating in my mind. There's great people there, but the overarching thing is that they want to guilt you into making sure that you stay true to them. And you've got to wonder how these higher ups in this church go, oh, well, we've made them feel so badly, they're killing themselves. But somehow they still wake up and go, well, that's their fault because they were gay and you're not supposed to be gay.
And you lived that firsthand, like your brother's gay and grew up Mormon as well. So he had to deal with all of that bullshit. And you probably didn't find that out till later, but that had to just totally suck for him.
Yeah, for sure. Him being younger, he wasn't nearly ingrained in the church as I was, because even at 16, he was 12. So as he's gotten older, he realizes that as well. I think he stopped going to church at a time where maybe that guilt wasn't quite the way it was. However, when he came out with my parents, even though they hadn't been going to church, their guilt rose to the forefront. And, and my mom was like, oh my gosh, why is he gay?
What did we do wrong? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I went to my parents and I was like, I kind of knew my brother was gay when he was like 8. You kind of had that notion and I just never cared. And once he came out and I was like, are you happy? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, great. He's like, really? Because he was afraid, because of my background of being the jock of the family and all that stuff, that I would be like, I can't believe you're gay. I was never that way. And so it was really easy for me to go to my parents when they were kind of freaking out, especially my mom, and just be like, hey, this is who Jeremy is. He's always been this way. This is great. Now he can finally be himself and be authentic and be happy. And isn't that what you really want? And they're like, yeah. And so it kind of settled down pretty quickly when I started having those conversations with my parents. And I was truly happy for my brother to finally have come out, which, I think for anyone, the same thing with Gus or anyone else that's in that position. I would encourage anyone to find the right people to come out to if they're still in the closet. But also I would say, it's like they have to do it when they're ready. Like I've had other people go, oh, we think this guy's gay. He just needs to come out. And I'm like, that's not how it works. It's the same thing. Like, this guy's addicted to drugs. Well, they're not going to get off drugs unless they ultimately want to, right?
Yep.
You can do those interventions and all those kind of things. But until you personally are like, I need help or I need to do this, it will never work.
Yeah. And I'm going to jump back into where you said that you were a jock and you were the jock of the family, because we're going to get into skiing a little bit. And this is all going to come back up later as well. But skiing was a big thing for you. You started out ski racing and then you moved over to freestyle. And being that you're like 51 years old, when you were coming up in the freestyle world, was it aerials, moguls, and maybe even ballet back then?
Yeah, it was. But when I started, it was only moguls.
Okay.
Well, I shouldn't say that because, it was so early on. Yes, we were doing aerials, but it was like you'd have the mogul competition one day, and like at Brighton, and then Sundays were aerials, but it was strictly upright. they'd have these 3 jumps, and they were these big upright jumps, and you'd go from doing anything from a twister spread, and then, the bigger guys were going up the number 3 kicker and doing quad daffies. I mean, those were the big tricks back then. It's kind of funny to think about. So you're almost just kind of taking like an air bump that you were hitting in moguls and just putting it on an air hill and doing the same tricks or trying to go a little bit bigger. We played around with ballet at the time. I think I might have done 1 or 2 events when I was really young. And then a lot of us here in Park City, we just went all in with moguls. We were the Park City boys, especially once we got out of high school. There was this core group of people here in Park City that everyone knew as the boys. And it was just a large group of mogul skiers. And we would just go up every day and just rip vanes all day long and just coach each other. It was kind of funny.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm going to start out with the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. Not only do they make the Northwest's best beers, but if you haven't tried their clean line seltzers or cocktails in a can, well, you're missing out. And you can try just about everything at their Denver, Portland, Boise, and Bend-based pubs. Really, 10 Barrel specializes in everything that I think is fun: skiing, snowboarding, biking, and drinking beer outside. And from supporting a world-class team of athletes that includes Lucas Walks, E-Jack, Curtis Cizek, Kate Zeleth, Carson Storch, and Ben Ferguson, they also create countless events and host their own, like their epic Pray for Snow parties. On top of that, they give back to causes like Protect Our Winters. They have supported this podcast for years, and to celebrate that, next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of 10 Barrel and drink it outside. For more on everything 10 Barrel, head on over to 10barrel.com. Next up is Elan Skis, and I've told you before how much fun I'm having on my Ripstick 96 Black Edition. And for the past decade, I've skied a wider ski because that's what I thought people did in the Northwest. And I've had a blast on my Ripstick 106. But when it's hard and fast out there, the 96 is so much more fun. That carving sensation, well, I feel it a whole lot more, and I'm hooked on the more narrow-waisted ski. And being that these skis are made in Elan's best-in-class factory in Slovenia, the quality of my skis is visibly better than anything else on the wall. Next time you're at a place that you can demo some skis, try something out of the Ripstick line and you will be sold on Elan just like I am. They are so good and they're always good times. To find out more about the skis, message me or check out elanskis.com. My final sponsor this round is Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. Peter Glenn has been getting people out there for over 60 years, and whether you're going on vacation or a weekend warrior or ski or ride every day, Peter Glenn has all the brands, all the deals, a knowledgeable staff, a price-matching policy, and free shipping on orders of $49 or more. If you're listening to this podcast and need gear, please do me a favor and head on over to peterglenn.com. They have all the deals, and by buying from them, you are supporting the show and keeping it going. So please check out peterglenn.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. When you were actually out skiing and competing, and I'm guessing you're traveling a little bit for moguls, are you skiing against like the JFs and the JPs and Douglas and Zox and that whole crew?
I crossed paths with them barely. So I was kind of on the bottom end of the crew that I competed with. So like there was a handful of us that would go from doing regional events to NORAMs. And so I skied some NORAMs against those guys. But then you had the guys of the Craig Rodman, Sean Smith, Todd Shermans of the world that were making World Cup. So they kind of crossed paths with those guys a little bit more. So I knew of them for sure because, I'd go to these NORAMs and they would be there. But I was always on that tiered down, just always trying to break in. And a lot of it was mental. I never believed in myself. So I was like, I'm good, but am I that good?
So you graduate high school, you go into college, and you're still competing in moguls. But what makes you stop competing when you're in college?
I was chasing the dream, and it was a lot of work. And I could have made a lot of different decisions at the time. But the one thing that I had, I think a little bit against me, was my parents weren't very supportive of it. They didn't really think that there was much for me to get out of this. And they were very adamant that I needed to be going to college. So I was like, okay, I'll go to college. That way they would get off my back so I could do this. So I was kind of burning the matchstick from both ends a little bit and never really able to get into that perfect groove because most everyone that I was traveling with and competing with just were able to take school off for that period of time. I mean, they all ended up going back to school and graduating, most of them, and doing very well. But I was kind of forced into this different little world in order to make things work. And it was the only way financially I could do it because if I went to school, then my parents would pay for my car insurance and a few other things. So I chose that path. And so that's kind of where it went. And again, I was breaking into the NORAMs and making nationals and things like that, but I just couldn't get to that level to where, I could actually make the full US team or anything like that.
So the next step for you after quitting competing is for you to go to law school. And for a guy who's been close to snow his entire life, and snow's pretty much defined you, how do you end up at the country club that is Pepperdine University?
It is a country club. There's no question. I applied to 2 schools and I needed out of the snow and I needed out of the mountains. So I applied to USF in San Francisco and Pepperdine just because I wanted to be by the beach and learn how to surf. I'd always, thought surfing was just such a cool culture and very similar to what we did in the mountains, but it was just something that was enticing to me. So I got into Pepperdine. I had done really well on my LSAT and they were giving me a little bit of a tuition break because of that. And so there I went.
And I think a really cool part of your Pepperdine experience has to do with skiing still, because your girlfriend, who eventually becomes your wife, well, she has something that a lot of your athletes are never going to have, an Olympic gold medal in aerials. That's got to be like the most special athlete and the most important Michael Spencer moment with an athlete ever before, is seeing your girlfriend and eventual wife take the gold. You were there for that, right?
I was. Yeah. I mean, that was what was really interesting is when I met Nikki in 1994, the summer of 94. So she had just done her first Olympics. And she came from a family that was extremely encouraging and everything else. So that was kind of where my ski career took off a little bit more as well, because finally I met someone who was extremely encouraging and motivating for me to pursue my dreams as well. So that was really nice. So we kind of had these similar paths, although she was off in Europe at World Cups and traveling around with, the best in the world. But I definitely got inspired by her to understand that a little bit of what it takes and that someone actually believes in me. And so for probably all the way until she won her gold medal, that's when I had my most success, winning intermountain events and all those kind of things, which at that time was a pretty big deal. It was just a really good time for me for sure. But then watching her win and everything was just quite the ride. And that was so funny. I remember for about a month, I just went on this crazy train of interviews, like what Shaun's doing and what a lot of my athletes have done, and the same kind of thing I did with Gus in 2014. But then I was strictly just an innocent bystander. So I flew first class for my very first time because David Letterman flew her out to be on David Letterman. So I flew first class. So I was living it up. I was like, first class? All right, give me drinks, give me the food. And in a month's time, I went back and I went to a competition and we were in the lodge and getting ready and changing. And I took off whatever t-shirt or sweatshirt I was wearing and to put on, my base layers and stuff. And a good friend of mine looked at me and goes, wow, you've been enjoying yourself. I'm like, what? He's like, looking a little chubby. And I'm like, I know.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was pretty fun. And then after all that, that's when I was like, at the same time, I was like, I think I've lived a good enough life through this ski career that it was time to figure something else out. And law school just kind of came up as an opportunity that I was like, yeah, I'm going to go do this.
While you're in law school, you get back into moguls a little bit and you're doing probably almost better than you've ever done because there's no pressure on you and it's all about fun. But then you destroy your knee at a comp, which totally sucks. But do you look at that as a blessing in disguise? Because it kind of puts your career on track to finish school a year early, which puts you in a position to start practicing law or being a lawyer or figuring out an internship before all your classmates.
Yeah, I mean, it is so crazy. I mean, wow, so impressive how you know all this stuff. Yeah, I do look at it as a blessing in disguise. I mean, at the time, doing those events when I was in law school was strictly just a stress reliever. It was awesome. In hindsight, I've always said, I'm like, if I competed like that my whole career, getting in the gate and going like, why does it matter? It doesn't matter. I would have done so much better. But it was just so much fun. Like those were some of the most fun events I ever skied because I didn't really care how I did. And it just worked out. But yeah, there was that one event that I just crashed in training and I tweaked my knee a little bit, but I'd really hurt my back and my ribs. And everyone's like, dude, your knee. And I was like, my knee feels fine, my back and everything. And so I was like, I'm fine. I'm going to go up and do this run. I'm having fun. And it was a spring condition day. I mean, you could basically be skiing in a t-shirt. So I was all excited and I felt really good. But when I landed the top air, it felt like a firecracker went off in my knee. And it was so funny. I landed perfectly and then it just went off and I just fell over. Like I remember seeing video of it and literally people were like, what did he do? Like, it's not even a crash. I literally just tip over and there I am. And I went to feel my kneecap because I thought I shattered my kneecap. which would make no sense. I'm like, how would I shatter it just landing there? But that's what it felt like. So I got off the course, skied down on one leg, because Nikki at the time, she's like, don't ski, you're hurt. You don't want to damage it anymore. And then when I got down to her, she's like, what did you do? And I'm like, my knee is gone. I know it is. And sure enough. So yeah, I go back to school and I end up finishing that semester. So I didn't actually get surgery till May, right after I'd taken my finals of my second year. So because of that, and I had gotten surgery and I needed to stay close to doing rehab and all that kind of stuff, that you're absolutely right. I ended up going to summer school instead of doing the normal internship that most people did. Unfortunately, I had already done one after my first year. So yeah, I just blazed through a bunch of classes in the summer, got another internship in the fall while I was going to school. And there I was with one credit shy of graduating in December of 2000. So they let me go. And so we moved back to Utah, because that was a little over a year out from the 2002 Olympics. And Nikki had a bunch of sponsors that were doing stuff with her around the Olympics. She had already retired, but it was just kind of a cool opportunity for us to come and be there. And so I got a job in the legal department of the Salt Lake Organizing Committee. And yeah, that's how it happened.
And it sounds like that job in the legal department, it sounds about as sexy as being an accountant. Does that gig, though, make you realize that maybe you have something to offer athletes? And does that spark the idea that turns into the super agent that you are today?
You know, it wasn't quite like that. I mean, you're absolutely right. Being in the legal department of anything really isn't the sexy job that you want. When I was there, though, there were some really great people there. And what I did think about really hard was that no matter what I'm going to do, if I'm going to work as a lawyer, I'm going to be in-house counsel. I do not want to be working at a law firm. I just knew that. The grind and everything else. I wanted to be able to be surrounded by more than just attorneys. And so if you're in-house counsel, you get to, associate with all the other people inside that company.
Yep.
So that's kind of what I was looking at. And believe it or not, there was an outside PR firm, and I wish I could remember their name, but they were recruiting me so hard. There's a woman named Jamie who was inside at SLOC for that PR firm who I got to know. And then she had me meet the owner and the boss of it, who they actually were Mitt Romney's personal PR group at the time. And we were supposed to go out to dinner. And so they came and got me in a car. And this guy was on the phone with Mitt. And this is 2001, talking about his presidential campaign for, 2008?
Yeah.
So it was really crazy to see that. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. So they were really trying to recruit me hard. I don't know why. I guess with my legal expertise and my love for marketing and communication, because that was my undergrad, it was going to work out. And I was like, okay, this could be really cool. But then a couple of athletes I knew, one of them being Shannon Barkey, and then another being Tristan Gale, who was, won the gold for skeleton here in 2002, which was the first time that sport was ever in the Olympics. They came to me and said, we need some help. Like, I have these contracts and then this is happening. Would you want to? And I was like, this would be way better than just about anything I could potentially do. And fortunately, it's just Nikki and I, and she's doing all right. So if it fails, I'll just become an attorney. And that's kind of how it happened.
So these athletes come to you to talk contracts, and I think that first group of athletes you had was like Megan Brown, Shannon Barkey,
Yep.
You said Tristan Gale, and I could be missing people, but you get those 3 or you get 4 athletes, and is that when you're like, you know what, I'm going to go all in, I'm going to start this company, and is that when you start Ego Sports Management, is like for them and through them?
It is. There was one other guy named Andy Carroll at the time. His son was competing in moguls as well. So he knew me through that. And so he knew that I was kind of like starting to work with these people. And he came to me and was like, dude, I want to do this. You're legal. He at the time was working for Dr. Pepper, and he really wanted to go after Jeremy Bloom. Anyway, so we jointly created Ego Sports. So I did have a partner, and we did end up with Jeremy Bloom. He and I lasted for about 2 years.
Okay.
And what's funny is he came to me and he was all in with Jeremy. And I was like, dude, we've got all these other athletes. I had just signed Simon, but he was so into Jeremy. And he's like, Michael, I don't think you have what it takes to be a sports agent and everything. And we'll just go our own way. And I was like, all right. That was another one of those turning moments where it's probably the greatest thing ever, because all I wanted to do is prove him wrong. And I'm still an agent and he's not.
Yep. And with that job, when it first starts out, does your life become pretty much reaching out to brands on the athlete's behalf, or you're pretty much cold calling people and selling athletes to brands?
Yep, 100%. It's just dialing for dollars. And that's how it starts. It was a long process. It was a lot of no's. Fortunately, in 2002, especially between Tristan Gale and Shannon Barkey, both getting a medal, and having a little bit of notoriety, there was a little bit of this like swell that kind of continued after the Olympics for a little bit with those two. So I kind of stayed busy, and that really helped me kind of understand how I need to develop relationships and how I needed to network and figure things out a little bit quicker than I would have had I just been sitting in the office still dialing for dollars, so to speak. So there was a little bit of trial by fire with them, which was way better than had nothing happened at those Olympics. But then from there on, it really became a hustle, and a really big hustle, to the point where one thing that I did wrong was I started grasping for everything. I started going, oh, that's a great people would come to me, what do you think of this? And I'd be like, yeah, I could sell that event. I could try to sell that event. And I just started grasping for anything, trying to figure out how can I make money doing this. But after about 6 to 8 months of doing that, nothing was happening. And for whatever reason, I had a huge gut check and said, wait a minute, you're just grasping at things, even things that you don't like. You said you were going to do this, so go do it the way you want to do it. And sure enough, I went back to focusing on the athletes that I believed in. And that's when things really turned around for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think with what you did with Tristan was a huge thing. You got a skeleton athlete, a pro model shoe or a signature shoe from Nike. I don't know if they were selling it, but she had a custom shoe, which is pretty incredible. And when you're able to do that, is that something that you pull out of your back pocket when you're talking to other athletes that you want to get on your program? Like, hey, I was able to do this for Tristan, and your sport's way bigger than skeleton, so we can probably do more for you. But look, I got her a shoe, and that's a pretty big deal.
Oh, 100%. I mean, that came so early on in my career, and to have that be such a big deal with Nike and do that signature skeleton shoe and put it on display. And there was articles strictly about the shoe that we made for her and everything. You better believe that was like a lead into so many things, right? Like you just take all of those little opportunities that were wins and use those as, this is why you should sign with me. And that was definitely a big one because, you hear it all the time. Every skier wants a signature product. And here I had a signature shoe. And you're right. It never got sold. They allowed other skeleton athletes to use it. I mean, who was going to buy it? I mean, it's not like you have more than 50 skeleton athletes anyway that were going to buy it. But just the PR behind it and all those kind of things was really great to say, I did a signature shoe with Nike for a skeleton athlete. Like people are like, oh, okay. He knows a few people.
And I would say with Tristan, I believe it was with Tristan, one of the things that really sucked for her later on in her career was she had her medal and her Olympic ring stolen from her house about a decade after the games. When that happens, is there anything you or another agent can do to get them another ring?
It's so hard. I mean, especially because most medals are, one-offs. I mean, you'll never get them again. So you do as much as you can to see if it's possible at all. But it's not like all of a sudden Salt Lake 2002 goes, oh, yeah, we can go stamp another medal. There just aren't any.
Right.
And every medal, especially what's really interesting about the Winter Olympics is that they are more unique than the Summer Games because the Summer Games medals on the back, it's the same back that has been there for every year. But for whatever reason, the Winter doesn't have to do that. So that's why a lot of times you'll see the Winter Olympic medals be so unique over time. You go back to 1998, that was the first one that they actually painted on it. And, 2006 was the CD looking one with nothing in the middle. So every medal's been so unique on the winter side versus summer.
So hard to get a medal back for an athlete who loses it or gets it stolen or whatever. So that sucks for her. But for being an agent, and I talk about money a lot, I think the standard practice from what I hear about agents is they take 20% of all generated income. Does that include 20% of winnings, 20% of incentives, or is it just 20% of all the sponsored deals that you write?
So, transparency, it's 15 to 20% typically. So kind of depends on what the brand is and everything else. We try to differentiate endemic versus non-endemic partners and stuff like that. But then, so we take on all the endorsement deals, including, whatever victory schedules and stuff that we build in those. But prize money from X Games, from anywhere else, you don't touch.
So it's all the deals that you're able to generate is the money that you're able to make. And I would think that there's a considerable expense for you as an agent too. Like to do your job well and to establish yourself, FaceTime with the athletes is important. Meeting the brands is important. And I would think at least for those first 2 to 10 years that you're going to be traveling a shit ton just to make sure that you're out in front of everyone. And like $20,000 travel years are pretty much standard, I would think, for yourself. Is that kind of part of the game?
100%. Yeah. So, we don't charge At least I don't charge them for travel or anything. That's all part of it. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've had some years that were pretty big expenses for travel, but you had to do it just because you had to have that face time. I mean, early on, it was always making sure that the athlete had time with me. I didn't want other agents stealing some of my athletes, not to say that maybe they would or wouldn't. I don't really know. I mean, I know of some agents that have stolen athletes from others, which I still to this day am just like, no way. That just doesn't make sense. I've had athletes who have had other agents, but the first thing I ask them is like, look, I don't even want to talk to you unless I know that you're done with your agent, right? Like, I never want to go down that road and start having a conversation with an athlete if they have another agent. But, I don't know how other agents always operate. So I wanted to be there, protect what was mine, so to speak, and build relationships. I mean, X Games was a place where, each year there was more and more people that I knew and more sponsors that I knew. And you just start slowly ingrain yourself into all those opportunities and go from there,
Yeah.
I always made a point, and around every Olympics, it was like, okay, we're a year out. Like, it's time for me to figure out what are all the agencies doing Olympic brands. And I'm going to New York and I'm going to go knock on every single one of those doors. And so I started doing that super early on to where now it's a little bit easier. I know who the agencies are that are representing those brands. It's easier for me to pick up a phone. I still do travel, but like you can kind of kick things off way easier without having to be in person.
It's time for my second round of sponsors, and I'm going to start out with the Seattle brand that has been around since 1913. I'm talking about Stanley, and they invented the category of keeping things hot and cold. Sure, there are a ton of overpriced copycats out there, but no one delivers the quality and, most importantly, the ability to keep things hotter or colder for longer than Stanley. I use the water bottles and pint glasses on a daily basis, and on weekends, their food storage solutions are perfect for all the foods you bring to eat at your local ski area. And while I know this won't last forever, the best deal you're going to find on any Stanley products anywhere comes through my podcast. I'm going to save you 30% off everything Stanley. All you need to do is go to stanley1913.com, go shopping, and when you check out, enter the one-word code DRINKFAST to get that deal. If you spend $75, I'll throw in a limited edition Powell Movement beanie. My final sponsor is Alpine Vans, and guess what? There are no more Alpine Vans for you to buy. While it's a bummer that the best sprinter vans on the planet are no longer available, don't worry. Alpine has huge plans, and next fall, it will be easier than ever to own the adventure mobile of your dreams. While I can't share the details with you yet, I can direct you to the Alpine Vans site, where you can check out Cody Townsend's video, which will show you the functional attention to detail that is put into every inch of an Alpine build. So head on over to alpinevans.com to see what I'm talking about. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. I would think when your career really starts to shine is when you become the agent of free skiing, and that all starts with Simon Dumont. And what's the courtship like when you're recruiting Simon to your program?
Yeah, so 2002 it happened. You watch Ross, Danny, and JJ sweep the podium, and it just takes off, right? Like, you see what's going on there, and and for me, I'm like, well, there's all these guys trying to be agents in snowboarding,
and there's a ton of money in snowboarding.
And there was, yeah. But for me, it was like, okay, I either go in and start knocking on the door with all these snowboarders who, they'll look at me as like, well, you're a skier, but these guys are doing it on skis. It's going to become big. I know skiing. No one's going after these guys, really. I think the only other athlete that really had an agent at the time was Tanner, and that was with Nadia. And so I was like, yeah, this is the space for me to be in. I think this is going to take off, and this is where I'm going to go. And so I, here in my backyard in Park City, they had the World Superpipe Championships, and someone had mentioned to me about, or I read it in Freeze or something about Simon Dumont. And I was like, well, he's going to be here. I'm going to go watch this kid. And I watched him, and I walked right up to him and introduced myself and said, I want to represent you. He was 15 at the time, the tiniest little dude, black helmet with that orange crocheted hat that he'd crocheted, that's what he was wearing and everything. So we had this good little conversation. He's like, yeah. He's like, well, let me tell my parents, and here's, we exchanged numbers, and I ended up having to talk to his dad, Francis. And for about 2 months, Francis and I had all these phone calls and all this stuff. And I mean, he drilled me, and he definitely put me to the test. But I wanted Simon really badly. I was like, there's just something, I don't know. I watched him ski and was like, dude, that was so impressive. And he's so young. And I just knew that, like, having someone young and building a career was going to be way better than having someone established. And Francis definitely put me through the ringer with so many calls and everything, but finally agreed, felt like he could put his son's life in my hands, and away we went. And the funny thing is, after those 2 months, I didn't talk to Francis for 5 years.
Oh, it's amazing. So he's just looking out for his kid. Once he got the peace of mind that he needed, he let you two run with it.
Yep, he did. And then I would see Simon's mom all the time, and I talked to Barbara. But finally, I flew out to Maine when we were starting to talk about Empire and some other projects and everything else. And I went and stayed with them at their house in Maine. And that was the first time I actually met Francis face to face, and the first time we talked again. And it was just a comedy act ever since. Every time I hung out with Francis from there on out, it was just hilarious.
I would think he appreciates you as well, because he probably didn't know if he should trust you during those first 2 months, but he finally gave you the trust. And then when you see him 5 years later or whatever it is, he's like, holy shit, you did me, my family, and my son right. And now you're almost part of the family.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, he couldn't have been more grateful for how I watched over Simon and treated him and the opportunities I was able to give him. I mean, granted, Simon was the one that was also helping me create those opportunities. I mean, I see my career and Simon's career, we paralleled with each other. You know, we rose to our best occasion together. And I think we feeded off each other. We helped each other. We supported each other. So I owe a lot to Simon. There's no question in my mind.
And once Simon starts to blow up, I would think that's when other athletes start coming to you, because you eventually have an all-time ski crew. And what's the progression of athletes in your stable? Like, how does it come after Simon?
Yeah, so next was Jossi. You know, in the early years, it was just like a little bit like a mini Simon. You know, here's this little kid, young, boosting out of a half pipe again. And that was interesting. For whatever reason, all of my athletes were half pipe skiers at some point in their career. In fact, pretty much all of them, you know?
Yep.
But at that time, everyone did, well, not everyone did everything, but if you were doing pipe, you were still doing slope at that time. So it was just great. So yeah, so I grabbed Jossi. And then after Jossi, it kind of just really started to spin with Gus and Torin. Colby came to me, wanted me to represent him for a while. So I had Colby on the roster. I was Sammy's first agent at the time. Sarah Burke, obviously. And who am I forgetting? I did have Byron for a little bit. You know, like when it came to Sammy and a few others, I think they wanted to be so much like some of the other athletes that were more established under my roster that they felt like I just wasn't the fit. And it's always relationship based. So, you know, Sammy and I were probably together for 2 years, and then he left pretty quickly just because I think there's all this stuff going on with Simon. He wanted that, but probably going somewhere else, he felt like he'd get more attention, which I totally understood for sure.
Yeah, well, you bring up Sarah Burke, and she seemed wise beyond her years, and she really understood the big picture. What was the difference between her and maybe the rest of all the athletes that you're working with, especially at that time?
I mean, as a human, Sarah was just this infectious person, right? Like she just made you smile. She made you want to be around her. And the last time I actually sat down and talked to her, we were in the Starbucks in Breckenridge during Dew Tour. So that was in December, and it was just her and I, and we were talking about, you know, what's coming up and all of those things and planning a big future. And we literally had just finished signing her a new Roxy deal for 3 or 4 years. And I remember just sitting there and literally, like when we left that day out of Starbucks, even that day, I told someone, I said, it's just so amazing. Like I'm sitting there with Sarah and like everyone's looking at her.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just like people that don't even know who she is, they're just looking at her like you could tell that she was someone special. So that was probably the most unique thing about Sarah. I mean, outside of the fact that like what she did for women's skiing with X Games and everything else, I mean, talk about a true leader. And she was able to do it in a way that it wasn't like she was beating down doors in a way that she was angry or anything else. She was thoughtful. She approached it all the right ways to make it hard for people to say no. It's like, wow, how do we say no to that? That was like so well thought and kind and sincere about why we need to be doing this. You know, it made it easy for X Games to go, you're right, here we go, let's do this. And all of those things. And it was just so unique, the way she was as a human.
Yeah. You always hear about her being a big reason why skiing's in the Olympics nowadays. And I'm guessing that you're part of that behind the scenes too, because eventually you step up to the plate with some others to form the AFP. And was the reason for this solely to position the sport for Olympic inclusion?
Not solely for an Olympic inclusion. That was part of it. It really started with the fact that, like, look, you know, you had X Games, then you had Dew Tour, you had the ski tour for a little bit. look, unless you won X Games, you really couldn't explain what you did or how you did it or where you ranked in the world. So our first goal was to try to create a ranking system, right? Like, how do we weight all these events, put numbers to it, and allow someone to walk away at the end of the year saying, I'm the best half pipe skier in the world. I'm the best slopestyle skier in the world. I'm the best all around skier in the world, right? And that's really where it grew, and in creating a more of a consistent level within the sport for the athletes to take the sponsors. I mean, at the time, first there was a little bit of pushback, but I know for a lot of sponsors, when you were at K2, I don't know if it helped you guys or not, but it seemed like a lot of athletes were saying, yeah, look, I can actually present them a schedule, show them my rankings, and all of a sudden we saw every ski brand putting in AFP events to the bonus schedule. And that was really cool because they could weight those, and they would weight them. I mean, you'd have AFP Platinum, AFP Gold, and Silver, Bronze. They would go, well, if it's a bronze, yeah, we'll give you $250 for a win. But if you're winning an AFP Platinum level event, that's a whole nother level of bonus money if you can do that. So that was the initial impetus. And by doing that, we felt like that's what will help get these guys into the Olympics. So we had started that whole point system. And then I believe it was 2010, all four founders took a trip to Switzerland to go to our first FIS meeting in Zurich. So it was me, Josh Lubeck, Chris Schuster, and Chris Gerard. And it was very eye-opening for us to see how that world worked and everything else. But we made an impression. Probably, hindsight's 2020. The more ingrained I got with FIS, the more frustrated I got. I mean, there's greatness in the fact that those guys are in the Olympics. But look, at the time, I thought I was doing good. I got nominated to be the chairman of the free ski committee. My whole fight during basically my whole term there was to get free ski out of moguls and aerials because they didn't belong there.
Right.
So now at FIS, there's a park and pipe committee, which includes snowboard and free ski. So now, it doesn't really sit with moguls and aerials at all anymore, which is great. But there's something about FIS that they could care less about the athletes, about the cultures of the sport and everything else. I mean, it's very Alpine centric. And I hate to say it, but even the guy who's running park and pipe from a FIS standpoint now, I mean, he and I have had it out. And this guy is supposed to be a guy who's brought up in snowboarding. And you think that because of that, he would have a little bit more of an understanding of the lifestyle versus, when we were in freestyle, you had Joe Fitzgerald running everything who doesn't understand culture or history of the sports or any of that. But this guy, Robbie, I thought did. But then this is the same guy that was saying, nope, we're going to put a World Cup in Italy on top of X Games. And his argument would be because X Games has limited the number of invites. I'm like, dude, it's the Super Bowl of our sport. Like, that doesn't matter. Like, respect the culture, respect the history. And there isn't any of that. And that's what's truly frustrating to me. 2019 World Championships, they decided to cancel slopestyle strictly because the Canadians said, we don't want to do it and we're going to go home. And I just looked at Robbie and I'm like, dude, you're going to let one country vote against what everyone else's wishes are to do this at another time when the weather gets better. I was like, you're not doing any justice to these sports. And that's really frustrating to me. It's all numbers and TV production and everything, and that's all they care about.
It seems like if it's FIS, if it's the IOC, it's like the most corrupt. They don't care about the horses per se, and it's just ridiculous. And I think you kind of outlined it right there, which is crazy. But while the AFP is the big picture stuff, I'm sure there's all kinds of little details and drama that you have to deal with on the athlete front. And what's your worst babysitting experience where an athlete just goes off the rails and you have to intervene?
Worst babysitting experience. Well, I would say the one that stressed me out the most was fairly early in my career. And it had to be with Simon. We were at Copper for Gravity Games and we were in a bar and he was just partying. And on top of it, Greg Strokes is encouraging his partying.
And this is a huge contest. I mean, it's X Games and then Gravity Games in terms of 1 and 2 back then.
Right. And his Oakley guy is encouraging this underage kid to go have a good time. And I mean, it was fun at first, but then it just got out of control. And I finally was like, Greg, stop. And I had to get Simon out of the bar and get him home. But I mean, I can say this now. I mean, he was so drunk. He woke up the next morning so drunk. I don't know what happened when I got him home. There's always a chance that he just decided to kick his boots or do something, but his boots are broken. And this is the day of slopestyle. And so he calls me. I'm scrambling to figure out how we get him new boots. Still to this day, I can't remember exactly. I think I found a shop that was willing to give us boots. And then I'd have Solomon send them boots afterwards. So he's in brand new boots. He gets up to training like so late. He barely gets a chance to take 2 runs. He's still drunk. They're closing the course. He drops in as they're closing the course. I have the Gravity Games event people come after me going, we're going to kick him out. He almost hurt some. I mean, it was just the biggest nightmare of all nightmares when I was just like, oh my gosh, why am I doing this?
Right.
That was a big one. But then, you know, you go to the event, it's like a jam session. Everyone gets like 5 runs. Simon's in the lead the entire time until they finally go, nope, we're going to do one more run. And the last person to drop in that run was TJ Schiller. And TJ on his last run beat Simon. So Simon took second.
Huh. Have you had moments where an athlete has said or done something where you have to go to sponsors and explain what happened?
Yeah, for sure. But nothing to where it's been extreme. Nothing too way off the cuff or anything else like that. I haven't had any of those moments where it's super crisis PR management kind of things. I mean, there's, you know, times where we've had to apologize for certain things, but nothing extremely detrimental that we couldn't find a solution for.
Okay, and then athletes are contracted for a certain amount of days with brands with these contracts. I mean, they want to have some promo days with these athletes. Does it ever get to the point where an athlete doesn't want to do something for the sponsor? Like, hey, you're supposed to be in Detroit tomorrow, and we've said you're going to be in Detroit tomorrow for 2 months, but you're not going to be in Detroit? Is that what you're telling me? And you have to figure out what's going on there?
Oh, yeah. And it doesn't happen just once. I mean, you bring a deal to an athlete. I mean, it happens with almost all of my athletes. They're like, yes, that sounds great. I'm like, all right, you're going to have to do these things. Oh, yeah, I want to do it. I'm so excited about this and everything else. And then it's time for them to start acting on some of those deliverables. And they're like, dude, I don't want to do that right now. I don't want to go there. I mean, it's literally like you're pulling their teeth. I mean, it does get tough. And there have been moments where I've had to cancel things last minute for sure and come up with an excuse or whatever. I mean, I've had it with all my athletes. I don't think there's an athlete that gets to a point where he's just like, he or she is over it and ready to like, just be like, I can't do this anymore or whatever, you know, I'm done talking to these people or whatever. But, you know, there's times with Red Bull where Red Bull's like, Simon, we need to do this photo shoot, and be like, all right, we're going to schedule this and we're going to do it here. And he's like, okay, fine. That's fine. And then the day would show up. He's like, dude, I can't go. I'm like, you're kidding me. What do you mean? And he would come up with some lame excuse. And fortunately, if it was an event, I was there. I would literally drive over, grab him, force him into my car, and then take him there, bitching and moaning and not wanting to do it and everything else. And then there were times like if I wasn't there, yeah, he wouldn't show up. And I'd be getting calls and be like, Simon's not here. Where is he? And I'd be like, oh, geez.
You're all of a sudden the asshole?
Yeah. I've definitely had to play the asshole multiple times, but that's my job. And I think almost to a fault, like I will battle thick and thin for my athletes. Even if I know that they're not 100% in the right, they're my athletes. They're like my kids. And I want to protect them as much as possible because I do know that, you know, when people go, oh, athletes can be such prima donnas or baby, you know, the babysitting or anything else. It's like, no, there's a reason why they're as good as they are. And that's because they have a level and a need to be selfish, right? You cannot be the best in the world without being selfish to a certain degree.
Yep.
And that's really what it is, because their entire life, they've figured out how to be so disciplined, but also have to sacrifice so many things. And the normal person doesn't see it that way. They see them out there winning events and having the good time and everything else, but they don't ever see the in-between. And now with social media, they're starting to see it a little bit more, but it's still so easy for everyone just to put the good times up. No one wants to put all the crap out there, right?
Yeah.
But every athlete, whether you're Michael Jordan all the way down to the next kid coming up, like if there's a 12-year-old out there training to be the best skier or snowboarder in the world, he's sacrificing already. He's giving up time with his friend, the typical things that a 12-year-old would do. But they're willing to do it because they have discipline. But because of that, it's because they also have a level of independence and the ability to be so selfish and go, this is what I'm going to do. I don't care what anyone else is going to do. And so that's where I think people mistake the babysitting and all of that as being, you know, oh, they're prima donnas or whatever. No, it's that they put themselves on the line so much that they don't have an option. They can't be the nicest person in the world and say yes to everyone and be the best in the world.
For sure.
Those two things don't go hand in hand.
Yeah. And speaking of being the nicest person in the world, I would think when you go into negotiations, sometimes the brands that you're working with, they aren't the nicest people in the world because they can be honest about what the athlete is or isn't doing, because that's why they have you in the room and not the athlete. So they don't have to say it to the athlete's face. the athlete doesn't have to hear it as well. Do those situations get ugly at times, like a brand pointing out athlete flaws when they're looking to tilt the negotiation in their favor?
Oh, 100%. I mean, it happens all the time. And it's pretty funny where they will point things and be like, well, they haven't done this or they haven't done that. And fortunately, I'll do my due diligence and I'll come back to them and be like, okay, so you've been saying this, but let me show you all these things. And I'll be factual about it and provide them with the facts and make them understand how wrong they are. And that's always frustrating to me when a brand wants to kind of act like a bully and act like they're not getting what they deserve and all of that kind of stuff. And I get it to a certain degree, like they're just trying to get the best for the brand and get the best deal they can. But early on, the biggest frustrating thing would always be where, an athlete would be like, oh yeah, well, my team manager says they don't ever deal with agents. And I'm like, any team manager that's ever said that, and people still say it today, it's like, wow, so you just want to take advantage of the athlete. That's all they're saying. They're not really looking out for the best of that athlete, because brands at certain times, they'll be like, well, this isn't working out anymore, and they'll drop him. And that athlete will be like, well, what about these things? And it'll be like, well, that was then, this is now. So it's always kind of frustrating when brands of all sorts try to play like they're the nice guy until they're not.
Yeah, and I would think that it happens all the time. And I guess it's your job to change those behaviors in some respects. But another part of your job is bringing athletes' ideas to life. And sure, there are a shit ton of personal projects that you get funded. But the projects I want to talk about, like Simon started Empire Attire. And with your involvement with that, do you own a piece of it? Or are you just managing a business for Simon? Or what's your involvement?
I did own a piece of it. Yeah. It really came out of the idea when me, Simon, and Troy Michaels were all sitting there and we're like, how do we brand Simon since we can't do anything on the Red Bull helmet? And we came up with the idea of the logo on the gloves. And what was funny is Simon was a Dakine athlete at the time. So we went to Dakine and said, hey, we want to make bullseyes on the palms of his gloves. And they refused at first, which is really odd. And so then Simon and I and Troy's like, dude, let's figure out how we make you some gloves. And so we made gloves for Simon with the bullseye. And we were like, let's turn this into a company. And that's kind of how it started. So, we left Dakine and started Empire. And so I had a small stake in it. It was really fun, and we had some investment and we were kind of seemed to be moving the needle a little bit. And the unfortunate thing for me was, in hindsight, that, and I went to Simon one day and we were talking about it. And I'm like, look, I got to figure out my role here. I said, I can either transition over and run Empire and not you, and we'll find someone else for you, or I stay with you, but I can't be doing both. I feel like I'm at my wit's end trying to control both and everything else. So I kind of pulled away from Empire and let all of them run it, even though I still had some say, like I would be a sounding board. But, ultimately, I think that we made some bad decisions with Empire that, I regret. But I still, to this day, I have people that still wear those gloves and I see them and they're like best gloves ever. That was a fun one.
That's where you meet Gus Kenworthy. He's an up and comer. And he is invited to the Dumont Cup, and you end up meeting him at the Dumont Cup. You guys end up talking for a couple hours. And is that how you end up signing him, is pretty much through Empire and the Dumont Cup?
I was out in Breckenridge or Coffer, wherever it was. I think I was in Breck for Dew Tour, but I went over because as a team of Empire decided that, yeah, Gus is killing it. He's a young kid. He's winning pipe, slope, and big airs at like the Aspen Open, all these things. Like that would be a cool kid to have on Empire. So everyone says, Michael, go talk to him about Empire. So I talked to him about Empire and he's like, all right, I'll do this. And then that was early that season. And then we did invite him to, because of being on Empire, invited him to Dumont Cup. And that's when he and I first started talking. He's like, I kind of think I want an agent. What do you think? And so we had a very long conversation. Gus is very thorough, to say the least. So we rode up the chairlift together. We were skiing to the top of the course. We stopped. Next thing you know, a whole hour had passed while we were just standing on the side of the hill talking while he's trying to train for the Dumont Cup. But yeah, that was kind of the short timeline of getting to know Gus and talking to him and then signing him. Once we left Dumont Cup, it was pretty much set in stone that I was going to represent him.
So he starts doing really well and things are starting to happen with him. But you have some kind of feeling that something's going on with Gus, but you can't put your finger on it. And you end up sharing the story of your brother with him and telling him about your brother coming out. Did you think that Gus was gay at that point and didn't know how to tell anyone? Or were you just sharing something with him with the hope that he would open up to you with whatever was going on in his head?
Yeah, I really wasn't sure. I think part of me was thinking maybe he is, but maybe there's something way different that I don't even know about. So I was trying not to assume. But it was more that like, hey, look, I just want you to know that I've dealt with all of these kind of things. And my brother's story was really about the fact that my brother felt like he wasn't sure how I would react to something that he was so scared about. But when he came to me, I was so accepting and willing to like go to bat for him with my parents and everything else, that it was more like trying to allow Gus to understand that you have a level of trust with me, because I know that's my brother, but I would do this for anyone. And I just knew he wasn't super happy about something, and something was just even affecting the way he skied. I mean, he would get so worked up and things. And for a kid who was so good, but as he was moving into the bigger events and getting to X Games and stuff, he just wasn't performing the way I knew he could. And you could see emotions just running through him. And so I just wanted to give him a safe place to like open up whatever it was and know that he'll always have a confidant to maybe help combat whatever he's combating.
And while I don't think he opens up to you right then, I don't know if it's in the months or years to come, but he's bummed out on things in general, and you two are driving somewhere, and he comes out to you in the car. And are you the first person that he tells that you know of?
Yeah, I 100% was the first person he ever told. Unless, I mean, I don't know the timeline of had he been with Robin already. So, you know, in that situation, if he was already dating Robin or in the closet, then yes, maybe I was the second one out of that. But as far as just telling someone who he wasn't in a relationship with, yeah, I was 100% the only one he told for 5 years.
And so that speaks volumes to just the relationship you have with Gus. And I would think all of your athletes is like, it is something that goes way beyond just being an agent. I mean, Gus is sharing his biggest secret that he's ever had in his life with you. And I mean, that's got to be like a huge thing for you, as the trust level is probably at an all-time high. But it's got to be crazy too that just this guy that you work with is going to share this with you. And what advice do you give to Gus when you guys have that conversation?
Geez, I don't know what advice I gave him. I mean, in those situations, it's hard for me to say, here's what you should do. I think for me, it was more like, dude, I support you no matter what. So if you ever want to come out, I'm behind you. If you don't, I'm behind you. If you need anything, I'm here. Like, you're Gus Kenworthy. You're a great skier, but you're also a great human. And I want to be here for you. And I don't want you to, ever feel alone. And so that was more, I think, the impetus of that conversation at the time, was just making sure he knew that he wasn't alone in this, and that he had someone that he could go to for whatever reason. And, as far as coming out, for a long time, it just was kind of like, he just kind of, again, I think he always thought, and I just went along with it, that he would come out when he was done skiing, whenever that would be. And, in the back of my mind, I was like, well, I think this kid could have such a huge impact if he did it differently. But that's not my decision.
Sure.
At all. And it never would be. When he decided to come out, it was not me telling him now's the time. He chose that 100%.
The amazing thing is, before he comes out, Gus becomes known for the guy who goes to Sochi and wins the silver, but people don't even care about the silver as much as him with dogs. And he gets famous for rescuing dogs. And I doubt that was a calculated thing, but was it like, holy shit, my client has just gotten more famous than anybody at the Olympics just because he loves dogs?
Oh my gosh. It was the craziest scenario, because I knew he saw these dogs and he was in love with them, and he's always loved dogs. I mean, he would come to my house and just go crazy over the dog that I had at the time, this old English sheepdog. So I knew he always loved dogs, and he told me about these dogs at the media center up in Rosa Couture that he would see, and he'd go feed and everything else. I'm like, oh, that's great. I hadn't been paying attention, because right when I landed, I ended up having to run point for Steve Ruff and Sage Kotzenberg. So Sage had won, and so I'm like a million miles an hour with Sage once he wins gold. And then as soon as I get Sage off to the US, it's time for slopestyle. So I'd been in touch with Gus, but hadn't really been noticing that he had been posting about these puppies on social media, which again, Instagram's fairly new. I was on it, but I wasn't really like ingrained in it yet. And the morning of slopestyle, I get this call. I want to say it was someone from CNN. We really want to get together with Gus and talk to him about these dogs and everything else. And I was like, okay, fine, but he's competing today. Can you call me after? Like, I was like totally blowing this thing off. Like, what are you calling me about? I was so like, oh, whatever. And then obviously the suite, and there's Gus on the podium, and man, did it just go nuts. I mean, he literally became, he was the darling out of all three of them. And for sure, the puppy thing made him bigger than the other two. But I also think that like, it wasn't my first rodeo of how to handle the media and how to approach it and everything else. So I think because Jersey wasn't there for Joss, so I was actually helping Joss to a certain degree, and Nick had another agent, that I just kind of was taking the lead. So, obviously my client comes first. And I wasn't trying to discredit the other two, but I was definitely trying to move the needle a little bit more for Gus as well. But it was definitely a perfect storm. There's no question.
It was amazing. And it made Gus Kenworthy a household name for loving dogs. And he's going to become even more of a household name and a really important person in just pop culture, as it gets to a point where he's ready to come out and tell the world during his competitive career. And do you guys sit down and come up with a plan of how to do this, or how does the whole thing orchestrate? Because it made such a huge splash and it was so important for everyone in this world, I feel like. And it was such a big, I wouldn't say risk, but a ton of weight was on his shoulders, and it put a big target on his forehead, because he knew that when he came out and told people his sexuality, there's going to be a lot of assholes out there that were going to be total dicks to him online. And what was the whole planning and execution of coming out? Because it seemed like there was some thought put into it. It wasn't just like, I'm going to make an Instagram post.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So we talked about it. We first sat down, he and I, and talked about like, okay, what do you want to do? Do you want to just tell friends and family and let it trickle out? Or do you want to make a splash? And we talked about the pros and cons of both. And as I mentioned earlier, I was a little bit biased in the fact that, like, if he was willing, I wanted to do something big. And the main reason why is because as an athlete, you're given a platform. And honestly, my reasoning behind this goes back to Sarah Burke. When Sarah passed away, the impact that she left on a community and in the world was bigger than anything we could have ever have even seen. I remember Danielle Beck, who was the girl at Roxy at the time, saw the amount of love, support, and donations that were coming in on behalf of the Sarah Burke legacy. She looked at me and she's like, I had no idea. Like, her platform was so huge. This is unbelievable, Michael. And I remember just thinking that. And so that was the first time I really realized that when you're a really successful athlete, you're given a platform. And we see it now, especially with social media and everything else. But at the time, before social media, it was harder to see. But you're given a platform to speak on things that most of us wouldn't ever have a big enough voice to, because we just don't have that audience. So I talked to Gus about that, and I said, look, it's not your responsibility, and I understand that, but you are the type of person that can really do good, not just for yourself, but this is about every other kid who is living in your shoes right now that has someone to look up to. And he agreed 100%. He's like, yep. And so we came up with a plan of like, okay, we need to write a story. And where do we go to first? So we went to Alyssa Roenick at ESPN. Gus is very successful at X Games and all these things. We knew how great of a writer Alyssa was. She really could write about the human side of the sports already. And so we just felt like that was so perfect. And doing it with ESPN was just perfect, because X Games is what made the sport and the career and everything else. So it just kind of slowly aligned. And Alyssa agreed and took it to her bosses at ESPN. And they were like, absolutely. This was all very in confidence who was talking about it. And then ESPN came to us and said, we want to put Gus on the cover as well. And their reasoning was because this is the first athlete to come out that's on top of their game, not retiring, not on their way out, but like literally smack in the middle of being the best in the world. So we're going to put him on the cover. And that's what happened.
And when that happens, can you, like, in your relationship with Gus, can you feel him having the weight lifted off of his shoulders? Like, does he become a new man? Because he was out and proud, and it was awesome to see. And could you see that as an agent? Like, wow, man, he's finally happy. It's almost like an emotional moment for you to see your client finally being able to be himself.
Oh, yeah. When I woke up that morning and we knew the timing of everything, and it was like, I think it was coming out at like either 7:30 or 8 a.m. Mountain Time. Maybe more like 7 a.m. because then that would be 9 Eastern, when ESPN was going to launch it. So I woke up a little bit ahead of time. And right when that came out, Gus had posted on Instagram. And he had kind of told me a little bit what he was going to say. Just reading it, I could hear his voice with so much relief. It was really weird. Just, I'm just reading a post, a caption, but knowing him so well and what he wrote, it was almost like I was reading it and I felt this 800-pound gorilla come off my back. It was really kind of crazy. Not that it was a burden to me, but I just could, I shared so much with him that it was just truly a special moment, truly. And just the outpouring of support that he got was insane.
And probably if someone looks at your career and all the things that you've done over your career, that's the most important thing for the global human community, is just having Gus tell his story and be who he is and be a positive role model for people and really take everything like a champion. Like, I'm sure there's a ton of people that talk shit on him because people are assholes online, like I said earlier. But it seems like he's just always remained positive. He's always done so many things, and it's got to be a goldmine for you. I mean, I would think that having Gus, when that happens and it becomes a big, big deal, it teaches you how to say no really, really well, because I'm sure everybody wants a piece of Gus.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it definitely changed the outlook and everything that we were doing. I was reacting to people coming at us to do things with Gus versus me having to be proactive and pick up the phone and call and pitch Gus. So that was very interesting, and it continued to grow and grow and grow, especially as we got close to the Olympics, because that's where you took this action sports kid and his story of coming out and that being successful and people really starting to realize it, and him doing all this media, into all of a sudden, now we're going into an Olympic Games. We're about a year and a half out, and he's going to be one of the first out gay Winter Olympians in the history of the U.S., if not the world. And he has a story to tell that no Olympic sponsor's ever been able to tell. Like, it really started to go crazy in a fun way. I mean, it was really cool to continue to tell his story and tell his story more ways than one and share it with different pockets of the world through different partners and stuff. That was really special, which I think was needed, because you go to the Olympics and we were getting letters and emails from people that hadn't seen him come out in 2015, but all of a sudden seeing this stuff start to happen in 2017, because they really only pay attention to bigger events, not X Games. And you're starting to get letters and emails from parents and other high school kids and stuff going, oh my gosh, you're an inspiration and all these things. I mean, it was so amazing, and the positivity. On the flip side, Gus goes to the Olympics and he has people also DMing him saying, die, you gay motherfucker. You don't deserve to live. I hope you break your neck on that course.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
So you would hear people say, like, why does this even matter anymore? Well, it's weird. I think in our community and in skiing and stuff, it's very liberal, right? Like, we believe in climate change. We want to stop global warming and all these things, right? That's a more liberal. And so we also have more acceptance for these things. Outside of this world, holy cow, there are still those people who just think gays and transgenders and everything else are the epitome of scum. And it's so sad to see. That's why it's still so important, because there's so much of this world that is that ignorant to what really is happening on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I was going to talk about a bunch of other things. I was going to talk about you going to Wasserman and then you being the VP of Action Sports there, and then you breaking away from them and starting your own thing with One Sports Global. But we're not going to talk about all that, because we've talked about a ton of your life and times, and now we have inappropriate questions. And I was able to get a guy that we really didn't talk about too much on the podcast, but he's a standout guy, an incredible athlete. His name is Jossi Wells. I know you know him well, and one of your favorites, I'm sure, but I'm sure all of your athletes are your favorites just based on listening to you talk about them. But I'm going to jump into question number 1 from Jossi.
Real quickly, can I say something?
Yeah, say it.
Yeah, when you say they're all my favorites, and they are, and the one thing I will say about all my athletes, I just want to put this out there because I was thinking about this, is, all of them have touched me in so many special ways. There's a connection that Jossi and I have gained over the years about God that is really special to me. And doing what I did with Gus and Simon, and then you think of Sarah and even Torin, going through all the hardships of Torin. I want to just, like, if any and all of my athletes are listening to this, I want them to know that each one of them have touched me in a way that is so special and has made me grow as a human that I will never be able to explain in depth via words how appreciative I have been of them.
Awesome. And I will say, when you brought up Jossi and God, he made me think about God in a whole different way. When I was talking about Russell Wilson throwing an interception in the Super Bowl, and I said it was God's plan, and he was like, no, Mike, that's free will. We all have free will. Like, if I want to hit a jump with too much speed, that's not God telling me to do it. That's me doing it. And I had never thought of it like that. So he taught me a little bit there too. And I thought that was pretty cool about our podcast. But I'm going to jump into question number 1 with Jossi right now.
All right.
First question. Who is worse at replying to your emails? Simon, Torin, or myself?
Oh, boy. They all three are the absolute worst. I'm still not sure they really know what emails are. Every now and then I think they get this thing that they see all these messages somewhere on their phone. They're like 1,001. Maybe I should read those. Yeah. They all are so bad. Like every sponsor, like, I've been trying to contact them. I've sent them like 3 emails. I'm like, dude, unless you copy me on it, so I know, because I'm always going to have to call them. It's hilarious.
That is pretty funny. So they're all just as bad as each other.
Yes.
All right, we'll go there. That's a very political answer. I like it. We'll go with question number 2.
Second question. Do you remember the first event your signature "Let's go, Simon" made an appearance?
And did anybody else get jealous of how loud you used to root for Simon, or were you that loud for everybody?
So for Simon, it was the year after he won his first gold. That's when that came out. I ended up at the top, which always became, from there on out, I was always at the top with Simon, cheering, and it was always me trying to get my nervous energy out. So I just figured if I pumped him up, like that would help me get pumped up and be ready, for whatever's to come. And so I started doing it. And then, started doing it with a few other of my athletes. And then, believe it or not, we were at the ski tour once and I was doing it for Simon, and everyone in the finals, first Scott Hibbert comes up to me. He's like, dude, no one cheers for me. No one cares about me. Do it for me. And then someone else. So I ended up at that one event cheering for everyone. And I was like, okay, guys, that's a one and done deal. I can't ever do that again, because I couldn't even talk after that.
That's funny. I'm going to go into his final inappropriate question, and here we go. And it's not really a question, so I'm going to make one up after he says this.
Okay.
Third question. It's not even a question, just a heartfelt thank you from myself on behalf of all of us you've helped over the years. Your work has helped so many of us make our passions into a career. So thanks a lot, my man. Love you, dog. Cheers, boys.
So he doesn't understand inappropriate questions completely, but that's all right. We're not asking him to understand them. But I will come up with a final inappropriate question. So you are always putting deals together for athletes, and I'm sure some deals are better than others, and some deals are probably just cash grabs, like, oh shit, we can get 30 grand and it's only going to take an afternoon, so we're going to do this. But what is the dumbest thing that you've ever made an athlete do? Or not made, but dumbest thing that you've signed an athlete to do for money?
Dumbest thing. Jeez. Do you have something in mind that I'm forgetting?
No, I just came up with that right now, but I'm thinking like...
Okay, I like it.
It could be something like, oh, we've got to go to Disney World and do this, and it's just a total waste of time, or just something that they really don't want to do, but the payday is so good that they have to.
Oh my gosh. I know we had a few of those. I just can't think of one off the top of my head. I mean, I know like with Gus, there's been a couple where it's like, dude, we're here. Just get through it. We're fine. Like I would have to repeat to him, remember, you're getting paid this. So there has definitely been those moments where you do these dumb one-off things and you're kind of like the dancing bear kind of a thing or something like that. I don't have one that stands out. Probably some commercials too that they've had to do and kind of be a little bit cheesy is usually kind of where it goes, because when you get creative directors who don't understand sport, actually, I know Simon had to do a photo shoot where he was like being hung by wires and having to pose as if he was skiing, but we were just all like, oh my gosh, this is so stupid. What are we doing?
So he leaves all angry with a $25,000 check in his pocket, and you're like, you shouldn't really be angry, although you are going to look like a kook for a little bit.
Yep, that actually definitely happened, and I do remember that one.
All right, well, that is Inappropriate Questions, and that's our podcast. And Michael, you've made an incredible life for yourself. When it all started with an internship with the Salt Lake Olympic Committee, and it could have been one of those things where you eventually graduate into your in-house counsel job and everything's easy, but you took the hard route and started something from scratch. And while that's never easy, when you look back on your 20-year career, it's like you went from intern to the Jerry Maguire of skiing, and throughout it all, you've earned the respect of brands and, more importantly, the athletes that you've worked with. And that's not always easy to do, is to please both sides. So that's a credit to the way you do business and your personality, and I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. And Michael, keep it up, because it's been so fun listening to all the stories, like I said before, that you have. I mean, just listening to Johnny Collinson the other day was awesome. I mean, he has such a good, you're just pulling things out of people that you're just getting to the human side of all these people. And I love it. So please keep doing it, because it's very entertaining for me to listen to. And it helps me grow as a person. And I'm sure many other people as well.
So that was time with Michael Spencer. And while I've had agents on before, I don't think I've had an agent on that is that close with his athletes. I spoke to so many of Michael's guys, and the way they regard Michael, it's so much more than a deal maker. It's like they're talking about someone worthy of being in their wedding party. It's amazing, and really, in this world, getting shit done is expected from high-level people. But when those high-level people have such strong relationships, like Michael does with his athletes, it really changes the game. It's no longer Michael working for them. They're all working together, and that's the difference maker. That's the podcast. Now it's time for the review of the week, and it comes from John Casson, who's a longtime U.S. and Canadian national team snowboard coach or snowboard backhand guy. I don't know exactly what John does, although I do know that he coached at Steamboat forever. He coached some of the U.S. guys, some of the Canadian guys, so I can't really tell you his title because I'm not looking at his LinkedIn, but he's had some high-test jobs with some amazing snowboarders, and his review is a 5-star review, and it's titled, I Love This. Here's the review. Mike is one of the best interviewers I've listened to. He does his research, but then lets his subjects talk. Always has super interesting people on the show. Best action sports podcast in all the land. Thank you very much for that review, John. That means a lot coming from you, as I know that you are more of a snowboard guy, and the podcast that I do is mainly ski, although there are some snowboarders on it. So hearing that from you and knowing that you really enjoy this and think it's the best in the land means a lot to me, so thank you for that. Email me with your mailing address, and I will ship you a limited edition Powell Movement beanie. For anybody else who wants to get a Powell Movement beanie, it isn't that hard. You just need to review me, and I need to read it on the show. So here's what you need to do. First, if you listen on Spotify, I'm not going to send you a beanie, but you can still star rate me. It takes 5 seconds. It's super easy, and it's really important. But if you listen on Apple Podcasts, here's what you need to do. Hit the podcast icon on your iPhone, and if you're technologically challenged and you don't know where the podcast icon is, go to your home screen, swipe down, and a search bar will come up. Type podcast in there. That icon will pop up, and then you click the podcast icon. Second, you want to search for the Powell Movement, and even if you already subscribe to the podcast, you still need to search for the Powell Movement. Third, click my logo. Fourth, scroll down to where the stars are. Fifth, give me a star rating and review. If I read your review on the show, you're going to email me with your mailing address, and I will ship you that limited edition beanie. If you are outside of the U.S., I won't ship a beanie to you, and that's not because I don't like foreign countries. I love them, but I hate shipping to them because they're very expensive to do so, and they require a lot of paperwork. So if I do read your review and you don't live in the United States, please give me a friend of yours' address who lives in the States, and I will ship them a beanie, and they can do whatever they like with it. So thank you, everyone, for listening. And I also want to remind you to check out my sponsors. Some have great deals within their ads. Others just have amazing products. And all of them make this show happen, so please check them out. The sponsors I'm talking about are Stanley, Alpine Vans, Elon Skis, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Have a great week, everyone.